My old house was located quite far from the city center, on the edge of a forest, in a quiet place. The tenant complained of a faint tapping on the front door late at night. At first, he thought it could be due to the wind, but these sounds continued every night. As my friend relayed the strange occurrences in my old house, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of curiosity and nostalgia. It had been a long time since I'd been back to that place, and I had fond memories of the house. But the tenant's experiences raised a sense of unease within me. My friend continued to recount the tenant's story. He mentioned that the tapping wasn't the only oddity. The tenant had also reported hearing whispering voices, faint at first, but growing more distinct with each passing night. These whispers seemed to come from the darkest corners of the house, from rooms that had always been locked during my time there. The tenant had even tried to capture the strange occurrences on video, setting up cameras in different parts of the house. When he reviewed the footage, he saw doors slowly creaking open and objects moving on their own. It was as if an unseen presence inhabited the house, and it was becoming increasingly malevolent. I was both intrigued and worried about the situation. I knew the house had always held a certain mystique due to its remote location, but these reports were beyond anything I could have imagined. I felt a deep connection to that place, and I wanted to find out what was happening. A few weeks later, I decided to pay a visit to my old neighborhood. I reached out to the tenant and asked if I could spend a night in the house to see for myself. He hesitated, but eventually agreed, warning me about the strange occurrences. That summer night, I entered the old house I had once called home. It felt both familiar and foreign. The air was heavy with silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As the night descended, I sat in the living room, waiting for something to happen. It wasn't long before I heard it. A faint tapping on the front door, just as my friend had described. My heart raced as I approached the door. I swung it open, but there was no one there. I continued to hear the tapping and the whispers my friend had mentioned. They seemed to be coming from the locked rooms, beckoning me to enter. A mixture of fear and determination guided me to open one of the doors. What I saw inside was beyond comprehension. The room was filled with an otherworldly, chilling presence. Shadows danced on the walls, and an icy breeze sent shivers down my spine. It was as if the room was a portal to a realm of darkness. I realized that whatever had taken residence in the house was not to be trifled with. I quickly left the room and decided to spend the rest of the night outside, under the open sky. The following morning, I left the old house, knowing that I might never fully understand the enigma that had taken root there. It was a place where the boundary between the living and the supernatural was thin, a place I would forever wonder about but never truly return to. And so, my old house continued to stand on the edge of the forest, its secrets buried within its walls, waiting for the next curious soul to uncover its mysteries. I've always been skeptical of the supernatural. Ghosts, mysteries, and things that go bump in the night. I used to think of them as products of an overactive imagination. But an experience I had in an old, seemingly harmless house would shake my beliefs to the core. It all began when my wife and I decided to move to a quiet town in northern New York. We discovered a charming Victorian-era house nestled amidst the woods. The house exuded character and promised a peaceful life. From the moment we stepped inside, the character of the house and the very air we breathed seemed filled with tranquility. The first few months were idyllic. We would wake to the songs of birds, sipping our morning coffee on the porch, and relishing the deep serenity in the air we breathed. However, over time, we started experiencing strange occurrences that defied any rational explanation. At first, they were minor. The creaking of the wooden floorboards in an empty room, faint noises from the attic, even when we knew we were alone in the house. Our cat, Whiskers, would occasionally hiss and arch her back at something invisible. We chalked these incidents up to our imagination or peculiarities of an old house. But one night, things took a darker turn. I awoke to find my wife, Sarah, sitting upright in bed. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her body trembled as if ensnared by an invisible force. I tried to wake her, but she was unresponsive, as if trapped in a nightmare. It was then that I began to hear a peculiar whisper emanating from the corners of the room, barely audible. I strained to make out the words, but they eluded me. As I looked around, the room grew darker and the shadows seemed to come to life, stretching and morphing. Panic seized me, and I reached for the bedside lamp, but the light refused to come on. Fumbling for my phone, its dim glow revealed Sarah's face, contorted in terror. The room felt as if it were closing in on us, and an ominous presence loomed. I shook Sarah, calling her name, and finally, she drew a breath as if emerging from an eternity. Her eyes refocused, but she had no memory of what had just transpired. She could only recall being trapped in a suffocating darkness. It was the first time I had witnessed true terror in her eyes. We decided to delve into the house's history. The previous owner, an elderly woman, had passed away in the very room we now occupied. She had lived a solitary life for many years, seldom receiving visitors. The locals described her as an eccentric, immersed in superstitious beliefs. We couldn't shake the notion that her influence still lingered. Raindrops were rhythmically tapping on the window. Despite the noise receding from the hotel, my room was enveloped in silence. That night, worn out from business meetings, all I desired was some rest. I crawled into bed and quickly drifted off to sleep. However, I woke up after a while with a peculiar sensation. Just as the silence reigned in the room, a certain silence also filled the air within. I opened my eyes and saw a silhouette standing by the side of the bed. In the darkness, I couldn't make out the figure clearly beside the bed. My heart began to race and I asked, "Who's there?" Yet the silence only deepened. I cautiously got out of bed, but at that moment, the room was flooded with light. The source of the light was the crack beneath the door. I took silent steps in that direction and stood before the door. When the door swung open, the corridor was empty. However, an eerie presence loomed in the corridor, as though something was there, but I couldn't see it. I continued forward, almost bumping into the wall, when I suddenly felt an icy breath on my neck. I shifted my gaze to the end of the corridor and saw a female silhouette. Her white dress gently fluttered in the breeze. However, her face remained obscured. "Who is this?" I inquired, but the silence persisted. The woman approached me, her steps almost gliding. With every step she took, my heart pounded faster. As she neared, I tried to see her face, but it remained elusive. When the woman was almost within reach, she vanished abruptly. The corridor returned to silence. Was I dreaming, or was it real? The next morning at the hotel, I recounted the bizarre experience I had in my room to the reception. The receptionist listened with a pale face and then refrained from telling me something. I checked out of the hotel later, attempting to put this incident behind me. However, every night, I saw the woman in the white dress. I never saw her face, but that silence and icy breath continued to echo in my ears.